So, hi, and welcome to A Night of Mystery with Jeannette de Beauvoir. I am Jeannette de Beauvoir. I write literary, historical, and mostly mystery fiction. And of course, it's mystery we're here to talk about today. So, one of the things that distinguishes readers of mystery fiction from other readers is that many of them want to solve a puzzle. They want to have the information that's going to lead to the solving of the crime, whatever the crime might be. They want to be able to be given that information in such a way that they can actually figure it out. So the writer's job there is to play fair, I think, essentially. And let me digress for just a moment and say that as an author, one of the things that strikes me as being extremely important is that I've got this trust that I'm trying to build with the reader. And in fact, I'm asking the reader for a huge amount of trust. I'm saying, here, take my hand. I'm going to take you somewhere you've never been before, and you'll be okay. I won't let you fall. When you're writing a mystery novel, part of that contract, then part of that trust is, I am going to give you enough clues that you can solve this mystery, but I'm also going to give you enough red herrings so that it'll be difficult and so that you might not solve the mystery. And that keeps it fair, that keeps it balanced, and that keeps it, I think, a lot more interesting than some of the more straightforward things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how mystery fiction has changed over the years. But what I want to say at the beginning here is that the question that every writer needs to answer for their reader is the so what question. So you've written this book, so what? What does that do for me? And I have to really ask myself at the beginning of each book, what is it I'm doing for my audience here, for my readers here? What is it I'm allowing them to participate in? What kind of information am I giving them? What kinds of doors am I opening into areas of knowledge or culture, etc., that they might not know? I need to be able to say, all right, part of the so what is an entertaining story. I want to give you an entertaining story. Part of my so what and my personal contract with my readers is, I also want to make you think. And I think that's probably true for a lot of authors, but it's certainly true for me. I want to make you think about something. I want you to close the book, and an hour later or 2 days later or 3 weeks later, I want you to be thinking about it some, because I've raised some issues that are important in your life too, for some reason. So that's what you have to ask, that you have to ask so what and answer so what, and be able to, as a writer, articulate why it is you should read my book. There are millions of other books out there. Why should you read mine? I need to be able to give you an answer for that. So the other question that I was asked to talk about here is where ideas come from. And I have a sense that we've kind of overemphasize this whole sense of ideas. And I need to say that a priori before I talk about where I get mine, because everybody's got ideas. Everybody's got great ideas. There are great ideas in the newspaper and in the stories you hear from friends, and just in your own imagination. Everyone is constantly coming up with great ideas. So I don't want to belittle great ideas. I just want to say that they're less esoteric than we might think. It's not just the domain of writers and artists and musicians and so on to have these ideas. Everybody has the ideas. The only difference is that for some reason we decide to put in a whole lot of work, sometimes very thankless work, to bring that idea to fruition, to make something of it. It's fine to sit and think, I would love to paint that beautiful sunset I saw. But until you actually get the canvas, get the paints, sit down and do the work, it was an idea. It was a nice idea. Everybody can enjoy a nice sunset. So I do want to say that encourage people, I guess, to have good ideas, to have great ideas, and to think about if you want to do anything with them. And doing something with them can be as small as sharing it with a friend. Or as large as writing a novel, and anything in between there. So it's really the practice of doing the work that's the hard part. My ideas come from some fairly specific places, although sometimes the world surprises me with something new. A lot of my ideas come out of history. That's mostly because I'm trying to justify the letters after my name that have cost me so much in those many years of student loan repayments. It is, collecting letters after your name is really not for the budget conscious. It's a very expensive hobby. So I try to justify mine by actually using some history in what I do, but I'm also just passionate about history and find it the source of just the most amazing insights into humanity and why we do the things we do and when we should and when we shouldn't. Later this spring, I'm going to be on a panel at the Historical Novel Society's annual conference talking about dual timelines. And this is where it kind of comes into the work that I do, because one of the things I like to play with is finding a mystery in the current time, on a current timeline, but that relates to something that happened in a previous timeline. And there are several ways of doing this. And I will probably have my panel there recorded, and we'll put it up on my YouTube channel for you to see. But it's an interesting way, I think, of letting people come into the past a little at a time. So it's not like, for someone who doesn't have a background in history or reads historical fiction, the dual timeline mystery novel is one that allows you to sort of experience it a little and then come back, and then experience it a little more and then come back. So I really enjoy that. It also means there's a blurring of lines, so that a mystery novel can be a historical mystery, or it can be a present day mystery that uses historical information or a dual timeline. And I kind of like that blurring of lines. Obviously, the people who love genres are people like booksellers and libraries, because it tells you where you put the book. If it's a mystery book, it goes in the mystery book section. If it's a young adult novel, it goes in the young adult section. Once you start blurring those lines a little bit, it becomes much more difficult for people to be able to figure out where it goes and how to promote it, how to market it. And marketing, of course, being a major consideration. We never want to not talk about marketing. So that's where the blurring of the genres becomes problematic. But it's something I like doing. I did it in my novel Asylum. I did it in my novel Deadly Jewels. I have a little bit of it in a couple of my books in my Provincetown series that harken back to something in the past. And so the idea is just, for me, they're just there if you listen for them. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One of them is my book in the Provincetown series called The Lethal Legacy. This came about because a year before I wrote it, I was on a panel at a different conference, and on that panel with me was a woman who is part of the historical commission here in Provincetown, and she had been doing research into the presence of the Underground Railroad in Provincetown. And if you know your map at all, you know that Provincetown is at the very, 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 very tip of the Cape. If you look straight out there, what you see next is Portugal. So it was pretty counterintuitive to me that there should be an Underground Railroad stop in a town that doesn't give you access to running any farther, until, of course, you listen to her, and it makes absolute sense that what would happen is that especially after the Fugitive Slave Act, when slave owners were permitted to pursue their slaves into the northern states, it became more and more important for people to have access to Canada. So what would happen is they would take the runaway slaves, they would bring them to Provincetown, and then fishermen would take them out to sea, where fishermen from Nova Scotia would meet them. They would get onto the Nova Scotian fishing boats and onto Halifax. Well, I thought that was fantastically interesting. And I suppose I could have written just a straight historical novel about that situation, that occurrence. But I thought, well, I've got this series going. I've got a readership already built up. I might as well go ahead and fit it in there. And since the series takes place in Provincetown, it was obvious. So I have a modern day current murder, but that was very influenced by the presence of the Underground Railroad in Provincetown. So, so that's one way of doing it, certainly. And also in the same series, I have a book called The Deadliest Blessing, which takes place during the Portuguese festival. And that came about because the then curator of the Provincetown Museum had called me up one day and said, Jeannette, because he knows I like history, we have some things in, I think you should come take a look. It's fascinating. So I went up the hill, and what had happened was a house over on Pleasant Street was being renovated, and they had found these artifacts in the wall. And they were mostly bits of clothing, a couple of shoes that obviously were for children's feet. And I thought that was really interesting that you would put those things in the wall. I mean, I understand doing things like putting a newspaper clipping or something like that so that future generations can see what was going on, but this was clearly not to communicate to future generations. So it made me examine this whole idea, which is prevalent apparently all over the world, of putting things in walls for safety reasons, to keep evil spirits away, to keep the devil away, whatever it is, and to keep the people within safe. So that became the basis, the sort of flashback thing for The Deadliest Blessing, which again takes place during the present, but harkens back to the past. I could go on and on about my books. That's not why I'm here. But it tells you a little bit about where ideas can come from. The other place that my ideas come from, and that I think everybody who's experienced this moment, this aha feeling, is aware of, is something that comes out of a moment. So quite a few years ago, I applied for and was given a writer's fellowship to one of the dune shacks on the Atlantic. They're old, they're shacks, what can I say? They're shacks that were either built early on with wood from shipwrecks, so that the people the men who were patrolling the coast had a place to hang out in the cold and the dark. Later on, they became sort of these bohemian places, and one of them, the Margot Gelb shack, named for Boris Margot, who is a visual artist and who is the one who built it, and his wife, Jan Gelb, who was a poet and a visual artist. And there's a consortium now that owns it, and that gives it out for 2-week slots for artists and writers. So anyway, there I was out there. You're in a shack with no running water, no electricity, just you and the dunes and the ocean. And part of the contract is that you're going to bring something back and enrich the town with it in some way. So of course I knew what that meant for me, was to write a book. And I got out there the first night, and being a little OCD as I am, thinking, 2 weeks, I have 2 weeks. What am I gonna write? I don't know what I'm going to write, because I always go through this. And that first evening, I went down to the beach and was walking along the beach. It was dusk, you know, that sort of almost spindrift off the water, almost fog on the land. It just was that hazy kind of dusk. And as I was walking along, I'm looking out at the water, and these 2 heads popped out, and they were seals. And of course, anyone who lives by the water probably is aware of seals, and seals are curious about humans. And it was a charming little moment. I walked along the beach. They sort of went along in the water, and they kept peering at me, and I kept peering at them. And it's a charming story, but I will say that when their heads first came out, I experienced a moment of fear. What is that? So as I was thinking about it afterwards, I thought, well, what if it had been something untoward? What if it had been people? What if it had been? And then I started thinking about, what if it had been, who would be coming out of the water that would be fearsome? And it came to me, the book that became Our Lady of the Dunes, which is the story of a young woman in 1942 who's sent by her parents from Boston to live in a shack because it's considered safer. Of course, it really wasn't all that much safer. There were U-boats right off of the Cape Cod coast. There were U-boat crew that came ashore, and it's quite reasonable that she would have been walking along the beach and have these 2 frogmen come up out of the water, which is, of course, what I do in the book, and really built the book, the whole story, around that moment in that dusk when those seals came up. So So ideas can come from all sorts of different places, newspaper articles, snippets of conversation, art. It's just a matter of figuring out where you can use it in your little universe. You know, where can I use this bit of information? And sometimes there isn't a place. Sometimes there's just a great idea and there's nothing to do with it. And that's when I scribble in I've got notebook after notebook after notebook here, of just these little ideas that I revisit from time to time because I have absolutely no memory. So would never remember any of them, but I revisit it from time to see if, you know, maybe now, maybe this year, there's a place that I can weave this idea into whatever my sort of program is, whatever my projects are. I can't always do it. I've got a lot of great ideas in those notebooks, but as well as titles. I do the title thing too. but so you can't use everything, but you can think about everything. And I think that's important because that is often what sort of ignites something to become something bigger and more significant. And then finally, their ideas can come from our own impulses. The first time I ever came here to Provincetown, and I certainly didn't come here originally to live, I thought this would be a wonderful place to set something. There's just so much interesting stuff going on here. And then, you know, as the years passed and I moved here, I realized it was perfect for a mystery series. And the primary reason for that, also, aside from the fact that it is a destination, a vacation destination, people like it, so they might be more likely to pick up the book and read the book. But also, Provincetown, God bless its heart, has a whole range throughout the year of festivals and what's called theme weeks. And, you know, there's Family Week and there's Whale Week and there's the Portuguese Festival and there's the Tennessee Williams Festival and all these things going on, which means you've got this steady sort of ebb and flow of people coming into the town and out of the town and bringing their own issues or problems or whatever they happen to be. As a mystery writer, that's the direction you go with them. The other thing that it avoids is, I don't know if you ever watched Murder, She Wrote, which was a really terrific series back in, I think, the 1980s or 90s. Anyway, Jessica Fletcher was the protagonist. She's a woman who lived in a little town in Maine called Cabot Cove. And she's a mystery writer, but she also solved all these murder mysteries that kept occurring. And after about, I think, 2 or 3 seasons, it was enormously popular, but after 2 or 3 seasons, they had her traveling. And the reason they had her traveling is because here she is in this little tiny town in coastal Maine, and everybody who comes to the town gets killed, or everybody in the town gets killed, or everybody in the town is a killer. And after a while, when you have a very, very finite cast of characters, there's just so much you can do with it. So they had her going off to New York and to California and places like that and solving other crimes so that she could actually return to Cabot Cove and there would be somebody there. And so I have somewhat the same problem if I just had Provincetown as the town. In the wintertime, we're like 3,000 people. It wouldn't take that much to kill off 3,000 people. So I love having this opportunity through all the festivals and the tourists and all those things to be able to have a lot of different people coming in and out. And as I said, they can bring their problems and their weapons and all that with them. But it also, I'm a little facetious about it, but I also like writing about a place that's not like other people's homes, so that they can be exposed to people who, you know, readers can be exposed to people who aren't necessarily like them. So, you know, for instance, one of my Provincetown books takes place during Fantasia Fair, which is the country's oldest transgender festival. And, you know, not everybody knows someone who's trans. Not everybody has even thought about it. And I don't try to, you know, hit you over the head with it, but it does provide the background, the context for the book. And again, comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is I want to entertain you, but I also want to make you think. So that enables me to do that. So I was asked also to talk about why you would write a series. and if you have to read a series in a certain order. So for me, why I write a series is tied into whether or not you read it in a certain order. On one hand, at least with my books, no, you do not have to read it in a certain order, because I've written it so that each book can be picked up separately and enjoyed. I think that it's kind of marketing suicide to make one totally dependent on the previous one, because you won't sell that one. You'd have to go back to the beginning, and it makes it really complicated. And I don't want to get into that. So I make each of my books a standalone, in the sense that you can pick it up and read it and never read any of the others, and it'll still make sense. It'll still be a good story. On the other hand, and the joy of a series and really the depth of a series is that you get to take these characters that you've created and have them change, have them grow, have them have all these different experiences that you're giving them in the different books. And I'm up right now to the 8th book in my Provincetown series. You know, they've got these different experiences that they go through. And so they change just as we change, and they become different, more generous, perhaps more thoughtful, perhaps, or less so, depending on which character it is. But it really enables us as writers, I think, to capture this fullness of human experience that's much more difficult to do if you've only got, 87,000 words to do it in once. Which is not to say that there are some books that are meant to be just one story and they're not meant to be a series. But I love the joy of a series is just getting to know these people. And that's another reason that people like to read mystery novels. I want to talk a little bit about that, because it's embedded in the history of mystery novels. And here's what it is. For the begin, and arguably Edgar Allan Poe wrote the first mystery novel. There are other stories before that that have mysteries in them, but as a genre, that's what we kind of point to as the beginning. And most early mystery novels were filled with really complicated puzzles and some sleuth of some sort, whether a professional detective or a police person, or just someone who's extraordinarily smart, like Sherlock Holmes, is able to, through deduction and all sorts of clues, solve this puzzle. And the puzzle's really all there is to it. And often the clues they give are not clear enough to the reader that the reader could solve it, because I think that part of the goal here was for the reader to be in awe of this great, smart, incredible detective. Well, all that changed with G.K. Chesterton. And I tell you, G.K. Chesterton is one of my absolute mentors, idols, heroes, you name it. I think he was a fabulous, fabulous person on so many levels. And I'm going to conclude with something about him. But one of the things that he did was he wrote a series of mystery novels that had as protagonist this priest, this Roman Catholic priest in a very small English village. And for the first time, through Father Brown, for the first time, the whole mystery construct became more human. It was no longer, only the purview of those who could figure out these intricate puzzles and find these bizarre forensic clues and that sort of thing. Father Brown specifically says what I did, what he does is he solves it. He says, I would think about what would make me commit this crime? What would make me kill this person? Why would that happen? And once I figured that out, of course, I could figure out who had done it. So what he's doing is bringing this humanity to it, where not only can the victim be understood as a whole human being, but so can the murderer. And in fact, Father Brown says again and again that under certain circumstances, we all could have been in that position, either one, either the victim or the murderer. So he brings this element of caring about other human beings into the mystery stream. And of course, that began this whole area of kind of cozy mysteries where where the person solving the crime is not a crime stopper, is not a detective, is not a police person, is a person, you know, who's sort of in the ordinary walk of life, but has this humanity, and has this humanity that is being touched and reflected throughout the pages of the mystery. And that's why there are so many cozy mysteries, and some of them, I will admit, go a little bit farther than I would like to go, with, you know, cats that help solve mysteries, and, you know, knitting needles that fall, pointing in the right direction. Some of that is a little bit over the top as far as I'm concerned. But my own protagonist, my Montreal series, is around a woman who is the director of publicity for the city. And my Provincetown series is around a woman who's a wedding planner, for heaven's sake. Now, I choose these intentionally because I try to find a profession that will allow a certain amount of freedom so that the person can spend some time solving a crime, as opposed to being at a desk from 9 to 5, which kind of inhibits your crime solving abilities. But the point being that it's not someone who is just about solving the crime. Almost all cozy mysteries, the crime is really part and parcel of the environment and the people and the sort of culture that surrounds it. So that really we are like we are like Father Brown. We're all saying essentially, you know, there's humanity in all of us, and there's humanity to be taken into consideration when you're trying to figure this out, as opposed to just, oh, you know, these cardboard villains and these cardboard investigators. And I think that that's what attracts a lot of people to mystery fiction. And the other thing and I'll end with this, again, back to G.K. Chesterton, who I just adore. An answer to why we read murder mysteries. I remember when I was probably like 7 or 8 or 9 years old, when I was first reading, my mother used to read mystery fiction, and next to her bed, she had this pile of books. And at times I would go in and look at them. And this was the 60s. So we're talking about some fairly lurid covers. Even the Dorothy L. Sayers at the time had more lurid covers than you'd see on them now. And, you know, there's a knife plunged into a young woman's breast and blood everywhere, and her skirt hiked up and all these things. And I remember thinking, what's wrong with my mother that she wants to read about death? And actually that's, you know, it is a constant question, because I am not a murderous person. There are people in my life I would rather weren't in my life, but I don't feel stirred to kill them yet. But it is fascinating to me to write about it. And so it comes back to, I think, murder mysteries are to adults what fairy tales are to children. And let me explain that. Fairy tales are just ghastly. If you really read fairy tales, they're violent. They have not happy endings necessarily. They involve things like children getting eaten. They're terrible, terrible stories. So why do we tell them to children? And here's what G.K. Chesterton says. His response is, fairy tales are not meant to tell children that dragons exist. Children already know that dragons exist. Fairy tales exist to teach children that the dragons can be killed. And in a sense, that's why we read murder mysteries too. It's because we have this innate desire for fairness, and the world is not a fair place. The world will never be a fair place. I teach a course on writing about trauma, and that's constantly this refrain of, we don't expect it, and maybe we should, because, you know, all things considered, we've seen already, if we've lived more than 10 years on the planet, that life isn't fair, but we still have this desire for fairness that's so strong that it becomes an expectation, and therefore we're devastated when something happens that's not fair. Well, mystery fiction makes it fair. I'm going to offer you a story where in the end it will be fair. The person who did it will get caught. So that restores that. But it also sort of ups the ante in terms of what Chesterton was talking about, that that I have some agency in the world, that I do not have to be a recipient of bad things without having some sort of way of fighting back, you know, of killing the dragon, of restoring some sort of order in my life or the life of my family or the life of my community. So I think that those are really, they're not obvious reasons for reading mystery fiction, but they are, I think, the most important reasons to keep us in touch with our humanity and to help us navigate life in a world that can be very, very difficult and very scary. And it sounds paradoxical, but in some ways, reading murder mysteries makes the world a little less scary, because we do get to learn that we can kill dragons. So that's it for me for now. I invite you, here's a little bit of my blatant self-promotion. I invite you to go to JeannetteDeBeauvoir.com and subscribe to my newsletter. I send it out every other week. It's got all sorts of stuff for both readers and writers, and it would be really fun to have you there. And of course, I would love it if you would also go and read my books. And if you like them, leave me a great review. And if you don't like them, don't leave me a review at all. Anyway, thank you for your time. It was lovely spending this time with you, and we will do it again sometime. Bye.